Thank you, Yermi. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. And I'm really happy to be back. Happy to share some update with all of you. And thanks for being here on a Friday evening where I could have been partying. Of course, partying is not an option with the COVID. So let me get started. So today I'm going to talk about, this is a brief outline so you know what's coming. There will be a quick update from my previous presentation, that followed by a discussion on the SARS-CoV-2 vaccines approved in Malaysia. And under that topic, I'll talk about the efficacy and side effects. What do we know? And we'll discuss a little bit of, the choices Malaysia has made in terms of the vaccine options. And we'll talk about SARS-CoV-2 variants under the evolution and whether the vaccines work or not. And then discuss a little bit what you can do to make these vaccination statistics get better, and discuss where we are in Malaysia. Address vaccine shortage, and then also discuss some things going around about the antivirals like remdesivir and ivermectin, etc. I will end with the mucormycosis, the black fungus, which is become an epidemic in India. We hope that it doesn't make it to Malaysia, but even if it makes it, it's not coming from India, but we already have this fungus at home. Okay, so first disclaimer, I am not a medical doctor, so don't ask me for medical advice. I can send you to the right link or right site for you to study further and be informed when you go talk to your doctor. All right, so this is just an overview, that is, when we talk about virus, it is the actual virus that's shown here. And the disease, we call it COVID-19. And the vaccine is against the virus, not against the COVID, right? And the other thing too, you should know, and I'll discuss this, is how the nomenclature for the virus has changed. And we already know all the symptoms, and we will discuss briefly if there is any change in the symptoms with the new variants later. So as you know, most of our vaccines were targeted to the virus spike protein shown here, which makes the initial contact with the host. Now we know that the virus can use more than this protein called the ACE2, but the important thing is that with the virus, there's only one protein called the spike protein, which is found all outside the virus that makes the contact with our human cells in order to gain entry into our cells. And briefly, you remember we talked about DNA and RNA, and the virus has RNA genome, has a serious implications when it comes to the emergence of many variants. And again, I'll briefly touch again later. This is the latest COVID-19 burden, and as you can see, the burden is very high in the South America, Russia, unfortunately Mongolia and Korea, and then Iraq and Yemen and South Africa, Botswana, and I want to say Angola. I hope I'm not wrong. Okay, a couple of South African region. And Malaysia is there, it's substantial, and it's a high incidence, and it is decreasing currently, but we are a hot spot. Okay. And when you talk about average daily, the hotspots in the world, and you can see South America is a big one, and then Mongolia, and again the same region as earlier, and Malaysia is also considered one of the hotspots as we speak. And again, this data I'm showing you is as old as one day, right? I updated all this data yesterday. And in terms of deaths, and of course, United States has suffered the most with over 600,000 deaths. And the green line is what it was just 3 weeks ago, the green line, right? And the brown line is what is the current numbers. And as you can see in the India, the number is very high. And in Malaysia, just in May, we had only 1,683 deaths, but in June, within a month, we doubled the number of deaths in Malaysia. So it's growing, and you can see that the circle is also larger here. So this what I showed you in February. I showed you how many vaccines were in phase 1 and how many has been approved as emergency approval, because phase 4 was never completed for any of these vaccines. It's ongoing. Okay, and if we compare it to where are we now, we have 8 approved, right? Besides the 3, all these things are approved in different countries, not necessarily in the US. US is we still have these 3, and then Johnson & Johnson has also been approved in the US. For some reason, didn't make this list. Okay. So as you can see, there's more drugs have entered the phase 1, more vaccines have entered the phase 1. So the numbers is keep growing. So we are likely to get more vaccine, perhaps even a better.
Kalai, you are muted, sorry.
Accidentally, I touched my mute button. So these are the top vaccines, which is the same. The list has not changed since I spoke in February. It also has not changed in terms of the clinical trials. They are still ongoing trials, except that the emergency approval increased a few more countries, but not more. So the change is not a whole lot since we spoke in February, or since we met in February. And these are the 5 vaccines that have been approved for Malaysia: Pfizer, Gamaleya or Sputnik, Oxford AstraZeneca, CanSino, and Sinovac. And we will look a little bit more into these vaccines. And as you can see, those are the 5 vaccines. They are still on trial. And the only vaccine that I know of had any clinical trials in Malaysia was Sinovac. So, but I don't know the data for it. We don't know if it's the studies completed. Where are we with this clinical trial? But this is the only one we know. There's some clinical trials. And we talked about the types of vaccines the last time. We talked about live attenuated, inactivated, subunit, vectored, and mRNA vaccine. And as you remember, where do these 5 vaccines that Malaysia has selected fall into the category? Pfizer is the mRNA vaccine, that is the 21st century vaccine. And then the vectored vaccine, this is AstraZeneca, CanSino, Sputnik. They all are very similar. They take a piece of the spike protein, the gene of the spike protein, and insert it into a virus that will infect the host, and it release the DNA that can be then transcribed, and then the protein can be made, but essentially still it focuses on spike protein. Okay, so all these 4 vaccines are focusing on spike protein. It's just the mode of delivery is different. And then the Sinovac or CoronaVac is an inactivated vaccine. Basically, you take the whole virus, you inactivate it, and you give this to the patients. In essence, it has more than spike protein. It's probably much more antigens. It'll more than likely to induce a more robust immune response, as opposed to this is a single protein vaccine, right? So there is some advantage to that. So, the vaccines can be delivered as a lipid nanoparticle, which is the Pfizer vaccine. And as I told you, viral particles or inactivated virus. All of them are recommended to have an intramuscular injection in your deltoid muscles, and 2 doses are recommended. The number of dose days has been predetermined, quite simply arbitrary, but it's anywhere to 3 to 4 weeks. Since with the delay in production, they found that delaying AstraZeneca is actually helped. So they say you can wait a little longer before getting the second dose of AstraZeneca. So this numbers, ideal is 28, but it seems like increasing the 28 to 40 days or 45 days. The number is quite fluid, and it can actually wait and doesn't seem to have an impact. So what about the clinical trials? I thought this picture tells us a lot more. You know, in the USA, of course, we have a very mixed community, but if the Russian population is pretty much a uniform population, so is China. And the reason I show you this is many of the clinical trials were done in these countries. Even the clinical trials done in the USA, 80 to 90% of the participants are whites. Whereas if you look at the Malaysian demography, you can see we are very different in terms of how we look, but basically genetically we are very different. How somebody responds to a vaccine or to an infection is very much determined by our genetics. And so you have to take those vaccine trials with a grain of salt, you know, but that's all we have. So that's the one caveat to all the clinical trials. And because there were very few Asians, the Pfizer had some, and they had a 74% efficacy, and the AstraZeneca had some. I couldn't get the number for it. Sputnik at 0 Asians or 0 Malaysians. And certainly CanSino Bio at the, one of the Chinese, mostly is in Chinese population. And unfortunately, Sputnik and the Russian and the Chinese vaccines, the information is not available, right? Both Pfizer and AstraZeneca had applied for FDA approval in the US, Food and Drug Administration approval. They have to provide everything to the public. And so we can access all their notes, the raw data, and make our own conclusions. So that is another issue with these other vaccines. How about the side effects? Again, the side effects, they only asked specific questions, which is simply, how you felt, tired, fatigue, muscle pain, etc. And Sputnik, they only reported headache and fever. And then CoronaVac, CanSino, we have no report on what were the side effects were. But what is important to know is that there are more side effects than this. This is based on that study, right? But as the number of people receiving the vaccine, the side effects are being recorded. And if you want details or you want to see where we are, I can give you links. CDC, Center of Disease Control in the US, tracks all the side effects, and they constantly update their websites. And then they also will verify if the side effect is related. Unfortunately, when one of your friend reacts badly, you assume that everybody in the world or everybody in your Malaysia is going to react the same, and you start bad-mouthing the vaccine. But if you look at how many million have been vaccinated and protected, and one is the statistics, of course, the number one that where the vaccine failed, if it's your loved one, it's hard to deal with. So we always have to take the benefit with the risks, like I say, when they say the vaccine is 95%, 90% efficacy, that means 1 in 10 may not respond to the vaccine and may get reinfected and may even die. So, there is a problem, but, you're getting a 90% of protection versus 0% protection is better. So you can take the vaccine. Like recently I saw a show, this girl said, I have a 2% survival, and her response was, 2% is not 0%. And so, everything has its value, and we have to understand, where we stand with the community, with the global community as well. So, so again, most of these Pfizer, side effects I showed you guys earlier is this general reaction and injection site. Nothing major ever reported for Pfizer, which is great. And we don't know about the others. What is important? Again, this is something you already seen, and maybe not the Sputnik one. As you can see, if you get vaccinated versus a group that doesn't get vaccinated or got what we call the placebo group, they didn't get vaccine. And the number of severe COVID, you can see these arrows, there are higher chance of getting severe COVID than the vaccine group. So even if anything, even if you get a COVID, you will still get protected because you had a vaccine, right? And the severity drops. In fact, all the vaccine shows that they're more than 95 to 99% protection against severe COVID. So there is a clear message that vaccine protects. It may not protect from the COVID, but definitely from the severe COVID. And the same number is shown here for Sputnik. Sputnik also shows that people with placebo likely to get a COVID, and the people with the vaccine are not getting COVID. So this graph reproduces each time, and similar results for AstraZeneca. So we covered, there are many different names. So you have this presentation, you know what they're called, like for example, AstraZeneca, they're just calling a vaccine. That's in Malaysia. And this is also known as Gamalaya, Sputnik vaccine. CanSino Bio also markets itself as Convidecia, and Sinovac markets itself as CoronaVac. The important thing is what is Malaysia has done, that it has acquired mostly Pfizer vaccine, or rather supposed to acquire mostly Pfizer vaccine. And then the number you can see where they vary in the number of doses. So here in itself, you would know, if I take the 32 million doses, Malaysia is about 33 million in population. So let's assume it's 32 million doses. If I want to say Pfizer for the same people, if I want to give back, I can only immunize 16 million with Pfizer, and I have to save the other 16 million to give them a second dose. Whereas with AstraZeneca, again, how do you distribute? So there is certainly a clear issue in terms of having enough vaccines, a number of the same vaccine to give to the same individual twice. I don't think this was thought through very carefully, unless you just give 6.4 million people Sputnik, and then 3.2 million Sputnik, and make sure you track back those 3.2 and give them Sputnik again. And again, they were all not delivered at the same time, because it's, they're manufacturing and they have to distribute across the globe. So there is always that issue there. And so is Malaysia alone in her choices? We have these 5 vaccines. Next few slides are just to show, how many countries are also using the same vaccine. Right? So that also gives us some confidence that this vaccine's okay if other countries are taking on. So this is Pfizer Biotech, that's probably taken up by most, as you can see in the Americas, most of the countries, and then in Europe, most of the countries, and some in the Middle East, and this South African region, Australia, and of course, Malaysia is here. And then how about Oxford AstraZeneca? This also has a high uptake. US, we still haven't approved yet. They're going up for a new approval. Excuse me. And you can see more countries are really taking on AstraZeneca, and this in Norway, and I forgot what islands are there. So Norway and Denmark has actually stopped AstraZeneca in favor of other vaccines. Sputnik is mostly Asian regions, including India, and they haven't marked Malaysia. I don't know why. Certainly Mexico and Venezuela and Suriname and Argentina, Uruguay and Paraguay. Argentina, and I think that is Bolivia, I believe. Okay, so and then how about Sinovac? Sinovac is again, China has a big footprint in South America, so it's not surprising. So the Brazil and Colombia and Peru, sorry, Ecuador, Chile, and then a couple of the African countries, and of course Southeast Asia, as mostly Sinovac has been being used, what we call emergency use. And CanSino has the least takers: Mexico, Argentina, Chile, Pakistan, China, and Malaysia. So in fact, CanSino is probably, and also Hungary. So it's very limited use for limited uptake of CanSino vaccine. So in your case, you don't have a choice of what vaccine you're going to get. You go to the doctor, they will tell you this is what you have, and you have to take it. So a vaccine is better than no vaccine. So I would say take, but this is where we are. And all my slides have a link, and these particular links, they update on a regular basis, literally every other day or every day gets updated. So you yourself can go and check, and I don't have to come and convince you otherwise. So then many of you might ask, what is the point of taking this vaccine? And besides what I've said, that it might protect you for serious COVID vaccines, because this virus is continued to evolve. This is a figure I developed with my niece some time back to show how the virus circulates in the environment, right? Of course, we know that the primary host of the virus is the bat. This is the SARS-CoV-2, the genome sequence is very similar to a bat variant. So we know it's more than likely. And it circulates around the bats, and bats did fine. They managed to, even if they died of COVID, we wouldn't know, because they, whatever that survived is what we are looking at. And when we encroach into their neighborhood, where we go build our farms into the forest, and we live closer and closer to the caves where they live. And what happens? They come out at night, they salivate, they defecate, they urinate. And as you remember, many years back, we had Nipah virus, right? Which in Malaysia, and it is literally came from a bat dropping an apple, chewed. That's what we think. It's, chewed fruits and dropped it in the pig pan, and the pigs ate it, and then pigs got sick. So you could have a similar things, but this virus is now, of course, we found in many intermediate hosts: monkeys, pangolin, a snake, camel, and pig, and a raccoon. And this is what we call intermediate hosts. And again, we wouldn't know if any of them died of COVID, but we know that when the viruses enter a new host, they continue to evolve. They acquire what we call single nucleotide polymorphism, a single change. But what that happens is, as the virus circulates among these animals, they also learn how to live with the animals. And now here we are, we also eat some of the meats. And again, the saliva, urine, and feces can contribute to this virus jumping to human hosts. So, and within the human host, it evolves, it circulates among human. We have a very, obvious, the globe has been an experiment, it's been moving from country to country, this virus. And again, as the virus evolves, what happens is it will kill people who are susceptible. And we know that we are losing millions of people to COVID. And those people who survive this infection, right? And then the viruses also don't really want to kill the host, because they also want survival. So what happens is there's a balance, a stable coexistence with human. So now the virus will circulate among us, and it will be like the flu virus. Initial Spanish flu killed many people. Did the flu go away? No, it didn't go away. So I don't think SARS-CoV-2 go anywhere in any near future. what it's going to happen is it's going to establish a balanced coexistence. We're going to continue to regularly update, like a flu vaccine. We may need to get a SARS-CoV-2 vaccine. So that's what we're going to be. This is the new 21st century flu virus, right? And even the symptoms will be very mild compared to what people exhibit, because people who can't handle the vaccine, the virus, are going to die, and we know that they are dying. So that is, and one of the reason that this sort of evolving and stabilizing comes from the fact that this virus is an RNA virus. Remember, our genome is DNA. We can't afford to make mistakes when the DNA replicates, otherwise we'll be born with one hand or a half a finger. But so the DNA, when it replicates, it has a proofreading function. What do you mean proofreading? When the enzyme makes the new copy of the DNA, it walks forward and then it stops and turns around and says, did I do it right? And if it didn't do it right, it removes everybody it made and then starts all over again. So that's what we call a proofreading function. You go along, stop, turn back. Did I do it right? Correct it, right? Whereas the RNA enzymes that replicate or duplicate the RNA genome, like the SARS and the flu, they don't have proofreading function. They make mistake, they keep going. So the new virus will have a new information or change, and that's giving rise to all these variants that we see. And there is a website that is tracking, and you can see there are variants that are circulating in Asia, in a South America, an African variant, and a European variant. And then there's an Asian variant. Then there's also Oceania variant. That is, when we talk about Oceania, that includes Australia, New Zealand, and Papua New Guinea and those islands around there. So there are several variants that are floating. So you can ask me, how many variants are out there? Thousands. These are the various variants that has showed up. And you can see the Delta variant is here. And you can see some of these variants will didn't go past June, right? Didn't go past in August. That virus died off, right? That particular variant died off. And you can see this is the June data, and this is the line that divides. Only some of them are breaking through. And maybe if this breaks through and becomes a little bit more infectious, we will know that this variant is, it's expanding. And you can see the Delta variant, you hear a lot about. It started somewhere around in 2020. Somewhere around November, I believe, or October, and that variant is now increasing. And this is what this figure shows. Again, this website updates all the variants, and some of the variants includes, some of the sequences in this database includes Malaysian variants. And in fact, in Malaysia itself, we have from the limited number that have been sequenced, we have these variants. So there's 2, 4, 5, 7, 10, 11 variants that are circulating in Malaysia. None of them are really bad. So we know that there are already different variants circulating in Malaysia. Again, the Malaysian data is limited. We don't put in, I think it's a pity. I think we should sequence every SARS-CoV-2 virus in Malaysia to see how is it changing, how is it related to how we are responding to the infection, and as well as the vaccine and the disease. So among the variants, we call the VOC, or variants of concern. There are major, this is started in 2019 in Wuhan, and but the thing is, they have now the first variant that was of concern was the UK variant, and then there was South Africa, Brazil, and India. And since this, calling them a UK variant or a South Africa variant has a stigma associated to the country, so they have now, just like 2 weeks ago, renamed all these variants using Greek letters. So this is Alpha variant, Beta, Gamma, and Delta variant. That's why you keep hearing Delta variant. You don't think of it as an Indian strain, but it's a Delta variant because it shows up everywhere. So these are of concern because many of them, the reason they are concerned is that they are able to infect more people, right? They're a lot more transmissible. And which means the original strain infected, 2 out of 3, and then the alpha variant 3 are, 75% infection, whereas you can see easily the delta variant is infecting much faster. So it's easily transmissible. And in addition, you need to know that, we thought that if we had the original variant, if we vaccinate 67% of the population, we're going to get herd immunity. Right? If you've heard of the term herd immunity, because if that 67% of the people are vaccinated, the virus cannot go anywhere when it infects those people, and eventually everybody get immune. But the Delta variant, as you can see here, you need more people vaccinated in order to get immunity. So these are the reasons why these 4 variants are considered variants of concern. And then there are these variants of interest. People are watching it, whether these variants are going to do something different from what has happened. And, we have these 2 variants in the US, one in Brazil, and this one has been seen in many countries. And then there's also Delta, another variant in India. So these are epsilon, zeta, eta, theta, iota, and kappa. In the process, you will learn how to Greek numbers as well. So, and I thought I put the flag here, so you'll learn how the flags look like. So it's a different way to, subliminally control people's information here. So, I love looking at flags. So this is a perfect way to teach people about countries and flags. And now I learned some Greek letters. So what is important is that these are common symptoms. We have discussed this in the previous presentation. Even though the common is dry cough, fatigue, fever, and muscle ache, and there are uncommon symptoms as well as severe symptoms. What we see with the Delta variant, at least in this what has been reported, they seems like have a congestion as well as a runny nose, almost like a flu or common cold. So even if you think if you got just a common cold or flu, it doesn't hurt you to get yourself tested to see if you're COVID or not. All right. Okay, so how about the vaccines? Do the vaccines work for these various variants? So there are supporting data. This is the variants of concern. Like, for example, the alpha variant, and we know that Pfizer, AstraZeneca, and Sinovac, they all seem to work, and we have clinical trials as well as lab and real world data. What is lab? Lab means we can actually take the new virus and see if the vaccine we made or the antibodies against this vaccine can actually neutralize the virus in the laboratory. So that is the early evidence that it works. How about the beta variant? The efficacy varies. As you can see, Pfizer can handle 100%, but AstraZeneca doesn't have a very little or only 10% efficacy with the beta variant, and Johnson & Johnson 64%. The gamma variant, it varies with the vaccine. And then the Delta variant, we only have convalescent antibody can neutralize. So in other words, if I take antibody from a patient, serum from the patient, that serum contains antibodies can actually work against this virus. With the Pfizer vaccine, they show about 90% protection with the Pfizer vaccine for the Delta variant. And all these the variants of interest, all of them, we don't have any real world data, neither do we have vaccine trials, any clinical trials. What do we know is that in the laboratory, these variants are neutralized. So there is, so the vaccine should still work. Let's move to COVID-19 cases in COVID-19 in Malaysia, and this information comes from WHO, World Health Organization. Every day there are deaths reported, and to date we have 4,000 people died. And if you think about it, Malaysia is slightly larger, or is more or less comparable to Florida, where I am, in terms of size. But in terms of population, of course, Malaysia has more, and we already have 6,000 plus deaths because we did have a severe COVID beginning of the in the last year, and everybody turned to us and said, "Oh, what's going on in Malaysia? We are doing great. Nothing is happening." But now we are sitting here and watching what's happening in India and in Malaysia, where the COVID cases are rising, the deaths are rising, whereas we are now we are on the downward trend. To date, the confirmed cases, more than 500,000, 600,000 cases. And then even though we have a population of 33 million, only about 3 million have been vaccinated. So it's really, really sad to see that number. And here's the deaths on May 31st, and you can see it's sort of coming down. We hope that it will stay in that trend. So if you go to this website that gets updated also regularly, and this is Malaysian controlled website, and you can see that how many have registered. Less than half the population have registered so far. It's only about 3.6 million has been vaccinated, and to get the herd immunity, we need a 80+% population to be vaccinated. And as you can see here, the best is, Putrajaya is more 100%, whereas the other parts of the world, including Perak, is not doing great. Sabah is, of course, the worst in terms of registration, right? Number of people registered. And here you look at how many people by the state-wise, and you can see the registration, Putrajaya 100%, Kuala Lumpur 97%, and these are the actual number of people registered. And I'm from Perak, so it's 1 million, there's only little over 50% registered, which is a shame. And I think all of us and all of you should do your part to get people to register. And how many are vaccinated? That's even a horrible statistics. And you can see even the Putrajaya has 100% registered, they only have less than 50% vaccinated. Kuala Lumpur, less than 15% vaccinated. Perak, 13% vaccinated. That means literally 9 in 10 people are not vaccinated, which means that more than likely you're going to have a huge wave, and then we're going to lose people, your loved ones, due to this COVID-19, if you don't push them to at least register and go for vaccine if you get an opportunity to get the vaccine. Okay, so the latest problem in Malaysia, vaccine shortage, right? And I already told you that earlier that, for AstraZeneca, they're recommending it's okay to delay the second dose. And I mean, ideally, 3 weeks later, you should get the second dose. But if you can't, you can wait for AstraZeneca. Can we mix a second dose of different vaccine? So first of all, what do we know in terms of, what do we have in terms of scientific, or what evidence do we have this 2-dose mixing works? We do have evidence in a very small study, 600 people, where they combined AstraZeneca and Pfizer. And they have a very good response to mixing the 2 vaccines. So now UK recommends people to get the mixed vaccine, right? But no other countries is recommending. How about the other only studies? So the AstraZeneca and Sputnik, this work was done very early in the lab because Sputnik was not doing very well. And of course, Russia wasn't sharing that information, but they reached out to AstraZeneca because they remember AstraZeneca and Sputnik uses the same system. It's just that the delivery vehicle was slightly different. So they partnered with each other very early in the process to show that the immune response to this combined vaccine was higher. Again, it was a very small study, and I think the study is ongoing. So this is what we know. These are the only evidence we have. So let's look at these vaccines that have been approved. These 3 vaccines are very similar. In fact, these 4 vaccines are very similar. You can see my cursor, right? Can you all see my cursor? Okay, so these 4 vaccines have the same protein, spike protein, as the antigen, or rather that's what the host immune system, our immune system will recognize. So these 4 vaccines, I think it's okay to interchange. That's, again, it's my personal opinion, so take it with a grain of salt. And we already know that AstraZeneca and Pfizer works, AstraZeneca and Sputnik works. And then I don't see any reason why you cannot mix CanSino with any of those, right? However, Sinovac is very different vaccine. And Sinovac is an inactivated virus. It does have the spike protein, but it also has more. If you ask me, if I were to given a choice of taking a second vaccine for this, that is other than Pfizer, because my first shot is Pfizer, I'm happy to take Sinovac, because Sinovac has, besides the spike protein, all the other proteins. So the immune response that generated will be a lot more comprehensive. And this is reason why, the Sinovac, they even recommend single shot. So if you have received a single shot Sinovac, you're pretty good. Okay, they do recommend it as a single shot, but one could do double shot. So it's all the luck of the day, what you get when you go for your second vaccine, right? So I wouldn't be, this is what we know so far. And again, the important thing is that we do not have enough studies, but currently this is what we know. And this is my professional opinion of these vaccines. So that's for vaccines. Now I'm going to turn my attention to, turn my gear to drugs. What are the drugs recommended for COVID-19? First of all of us should know that any drug against the viruses, different viruses, are not great drugs. They have a lot of side effects. And because the virus is inside the human cell, the drug has to penetrate inside the cell, unless if it stops it while it's circulating. It also affects our cells. And the drugs don't know whether that cell is infected by a virus or not. It will affect, it will destroy. It's just like a chemotherapy, right? When you get a cancer chemotherapy, you lose your hair, even though your cancer could be a renal cancer. But why do you do that? Because the therapy is systemic, it's not specific. So similarly, the viral drugs are not very good drugs, as is. And none of the drugs, or most of the drugs, won't even stop the viruses. They will stop the cell from replication. So it's a really double-edged sword when we take these drugs. So when COVID became an issue, what the people looked at, or the scientists, the drug manufacturers looked at, is repurposing the drugs. In other words, take the drugs that's already out there, can we repurpose it? And so then they do the test, they take all the drugs and test it, they get SARS-CoV-2 in the lab. Does it stop the virus replication? Does it stop, can it kill the virus? So that's the experiments we do in the lab. So some of these drugs have been approved for emergency use, okay? Just like the vaccine. And what do this, to understand how the drugs work, you need to understand the COVID infection. When you are infected, there are 3 stages. The early infection, your nasal, your sinuses. And as the virus, starts replicating and making more viruses, and their severity increases, there's an early infection. And then this is the pulmonary stage, where there is both viral response as well as the host response. So our immune system tries to fight the virus. Or, for that matter, even a bacteria pathogen, if our system sees these bacteria do not belong here, and then they will start making chemicals to kill the bacteria, or to kill the virus, or kill the infected cells. And many of these actually make us sick, make us, give us fever. And fever is essentially our body overreacting to an infection. And similarly, when we have this virus constantly, multiplying and killing cells after cells, our whole system also goes on overdrive. And when it goes on overdrive, what we call the hyperinflammation phase. This is where now you can't breathe, you can't, you need ventilation, you need to get ventilated. So what the drugs do is they actually try and stop this host inflammation. All these drugs, most of the drugs approved are are focused on how do I reduce the inflammation so our body can fight the virus without killing ourselves. And remember, why do you need ventilation? Our lung alveolar cells are killed, so there is no oxygen ability to take up oxygen, and then that's why we have difficulty breathing. Okay, so let's go through a few of the drugs. So remdesivir was actually had a clinical trial, right? And what is remdesivir? It was originally developed for Ebola, and it didn't work too well for Ebola. So when COVID hit, the company decided to test it on SARS-CoV-2. And what do we learn? The clinical trial is where the recovery is better if the patient is not ventilated. It lowers the respiratory infection. And here is a nice graph to look at the recovery. As you can see, it's only slightly better, but certainly it helps, right? And whereas if you don't have remdesivir, your recovery is slower. But in the end, I think they will meet, right? And it lowers the respiratory infection. And if you compare, if you have a mechanical ventilation, non-invasive mechanical ventilation, it's slightly like, you just breathe oxygen, not you put the tube down, that's called the non-invasive. And you can see it's slightly better, early you seem to feel better, but in the end, you both reach the same location right here. So, oops. And how about if you have invasive mechanical ventilation, that is you're intubated, you have a tube to breathe, and then it doesn't matter, it doesn't work at all, right? So the doctor has to be prudent in the use of remdesivir. So your recovery will be slightly better, slightly faster, but in the end you'll recover. And it's only if you're not on in an early stage of infection. Then there is, remember I told you when something, we get infected, we have this body immune system overreacting, and we call them a cytokine storm. It's literally a storm, right? And there's massive inflammation. And usually if you don't take care of the cytokine storm, you can die from it. And I don't know if you know anybody that, somebody goes for a bacterial infection and they're in the hospital, and then suddenly they have sepsis. What is sepsis? Sepsis is basically a cytokine storm. The immune system gone overdrive, your temperature increases, skyrockets, and in fact, they have to put you on an ice bucket or ice packing to lower your temperature so you don't have brain damage. And that can easily lead to a death. So what's happening in COVID patients? They're also having a cytokine storm. So, and not as bad as in a septic shock, but it's close. So what the doctor said, let's try and dampen the cytokine storm. Let's use anti-inflammatory agents. So they even recommend low radiation therapy or to use the specific inhibitors of cytokine. There is two that has been approved for some other use. There is tocilizumab and anakinra. And then, of course, now they have several others, Vital, Acido, 2DG, 2-Acido, 2DG. They all, and what they do is they can quell the cytokine storm, right? Because they produce the oxidative stress and then they quell the storm. And then steroids. Steroids can also lower the inflammation, but you've got to be careful when you use steroids. And already people are on steroids and people are concerned, if I have steroid, can I take vaccine? Yeah, your immune response is slightly lower. You really need to ask your doctor and get a little bit more advice on whether you should continue to take the steroid or not. So I don't have a clear answer for that, so I can't. And then ivermectin. I know people in Malaysia promoting ivermectin, and there was an entire video on ivermectin, and I wrote a very long rebuttal to the person who proposed actively promoted ivermectin in Malaysia. And it's a quite a well-known figure, and it's a shame because if you really dive into what we know about ivermectin, let me tell you this. Ivermectin was developed for severe neglected tropical disease, which is onchocerciasis, which is caused by a river blindness. And this is basically a parasite that enters your eye, and then it makes people blind. And this is very common in Africa. And you have to be careful in administrating this ivermectin. We know in the lab ivermectin can inhibit dengue, Zika, yellow fever, and even SARS-CoV-2. But in order to see the effect to kill SARS-CoV-2, you need 10 times higher dose than what needed to kill the other viruses. What are the side effects? Neurotoxicity. You can get a lot of neurological problems. Hence, ivermectin is used very judiciously. You can't simply use it. And the main problem is the ivermectin can, because of the higher inflammation in COVID patients, and this drug can cross blood-brain barrier. What is blood-brain barrier? Blood-brain barrier is the barrier that protects our brains from everything else. And if you cross the blood-brain barrier, this is when you get your, Creutzfeldt syndrome and all prion diseases, because things have crossed the blood-brain barrier. You do not, so that increases toxicity, and you might have serious side effects as a result of using ivermectin. Because of that, even though we knew ivermectin is able to stop SARS-CoV-2, no countries have taken up clinical trials. There is no appetite for clinical trials because of the neurotoxicity. So I would say, please, if I were you, I'll never take it unless I have onchocerciasis, because these are the only drugs that works for onchocerciasis. Okay. And then corticosteroids. So this is, I don't know what you in Malaysia call, and this is dexamethasone. There is alternatives, others, tocilizumab and baricitinib. These are both, commercial names. And this is to prevent organ dysfunction, right? And lung injury from inflammation. And they have actually did 7 clinical trials on the use of steroids to lower the inflammation. So what do they recommend? Strong recommendations of systemic, giving them systematically. So it's a systemic infusion. And this is for 72 days with the severe and critical COVID, only for the later stage, because the organs are under attack, the organs are failing. We still need to help the organs recover. We give them some steroid, right? Not to use in patients with non-severe COVID-19, okay? And not to use for diabetic patients. And I'm going to tell you why. Not for diabetic patients. So here's tempeh. How many of you like tempeh? There you go. Everyone loves tempeh. Do you know what is tempeh made of? It's a boiled soybean, right? What is this white thing? Anyone? If you made it at home, you would know. It's a fungi. It's a filamentous fungi that holds the tempeh together. It looks very nice, tastes very good. Why am I talking about tempeh and you're going to say about corticosteroids, right? That fungi is called Rhizobus oryzae, right? It's a ubiquitous fungi, which means it's found in the soil, it's found everywhere, right? We make tempeh, which is legumes connected and fused by fungal hyphae. And it's definitely a delicacy in Malaysia and Indonesia, but I never got the interest in tempeh. I never had a good tempeh, perhaps, right? What happens if those who make it at home? What happens if you don't preserve your tempeh properly? This tempeh will turn black. Has anyone seen a black tempeh? And the reason it turns black is it makes spores, right? The fungal hyphae will then start making spores. So here is the tempeh, which when it is not making spores, this is the spore, is the black spores. And whenever you leave the bread and when you come and open it, you see this black fungi on your bread. This is also the same genus Rhizophus, but this is a stolonifera, and this is a bread mold, right? You know you'll throw away your bread with the mold because you don't want to eat this, and these black things are spores, which means that if you just do this, it will spread the spores all over. You'll be inhaling the spores. Why am I talking about Rhizophus oryzae? Because the mucormycosis that caused the black fungi is the same species that's causing the black fungus. The same species you're using for your tempeh, except that it's an overgrowth. And here is again in a tube, a test tube, the fungi overgrown, and they're all making the black spores. If you look under the microscope, this is the hyphae, this is the spores, and the spores are black in color, and that's what is causing the black fungi or the black fungus. And when you have a patient in ventilation, and most of the time the intubations and all that stuff is, sometimes it's the sterility goes away. It's not so sterile. So what happens that when your immune system is suppressed, you're under ventilation, you are susceptible to bacterial infections, other viral infections, and what is important is a lot of fungal infections. And we know very little as to how to treat fungi, but there are drugs for some of them. And one of the reasons it's really hard to study fungi. It's hard to manipulate them. Like bacteria, you can manipulate them. And so we know that mucormycosis, that's the disease, which is the common word is black fungi, black fungal death, whatever. It is actually does cause disease. It's very rare. More or less 1 in a million, right? And interestingly, this particular fungi is extremely common in India. I think the subtropical weather or temperature and a lack of refrigeration, whatever not, I don't know all the reasons why this fungi is very high, the load of fungi in India. And as a result, you also have a lot of people who also suffer from these fungal infections. So if they go early enough, they get treated. Otherwise, they can easily die from this fungal infection. So what are the symptoms? First, you have swelling, pain, drooping eyelids, and then the vision gets blurred. And then in the end, you lose the eyesight. So it's pretty severe. And you can have a stuffy and a bleeding nose. And you can also get these black patches. Basically, the fungi is growing under the skin and it's releasing the spores. And that's why you get that, right? So there is a treatment, amphotericin B, which has a lot of side effects. And there is a small study in India where they did try the amphotericin B. The patients didn't do too well, and they're blaming the drug, but I think it's just a function of the disease, right? But if they catch them early enough, may be able to help. Unfortunately, there is no way to diagnose it early, and there is no any diagnostic tool, so until it's too late. So that's a huge issue. And so if you don't treat, the mortality could be 100%. In some cases, it's as shown, maybe it's 50 to 100% mortality, but anyways, this is a high mortality rate, right? Why black fungus and COVID-19? right? Why should this fungus grow? When patients are COVID-19 patients, what they're suffering, they can't breathe. They can't breathe, they have oxygen level is low. And also the fungus love lot of glucose. Who has a lot of glucose in the blood? It's your diabetic patients, right? And then the medium is sort of acidic because there is a lot of enzymes are released, and the infection, that's a function of how our immune system responds. We also create an acidic environment where the infection is. And then another thing that also happens is there is a lot of blood, the blood, especially red blood cells rupturing in this area. That's what causes bleeding. That also increases the amount of iron levels there. And all these are so conducive to these fungi and the spores. Normal healthy people will get rid of the fungal spores, right? We cough, we sneeze, we get rid of it. We don't get sick. But in these people where their lung is affected or the sinuses are affected, when these spots get there, they stay stuck. And then they start proliferating. They start replicating. And so with the limited reports we have, it's mostly in male and mostly in India because the function of the prevalence of the fungi in the environment. And both people who are active in COVID infection, SARS-CoV infection, and also in patients in recovered, there seems to have this infection. Because when you're recovering, your immune system is still low, and this fungi might still be there, and we still get infections. And particularly the two most affected states are Gujarat and Maharashtra, where Mumbai is. These are the two states are mostly affected by this black fungi. So what caused this problem, and this author calls it unholy trinity, is a combination of COVID-19, diabetes, and steroid. And there is a large population in India with diabetes, and it's diagnosed and undiagnosed. It should have been undiagnosed, apologize. And then we have irrational use of steroids. And it seems like when the patient comes in and then they are COVID plus, the doctors just prescribe steroids when they shouldn't. And then that coupled with the cytokine storm and damage in the blood cell vessels and lymphopenia causes this epidemic. In fact, India just declared black fungus as an epidemic in India. And diabetes, why we think that diabetes in India is a big issue. Here is the latest data, which is 2019, but I think it tells the story. Until recently, India was the diabetes capital. And now China has overtaken it. And you can see the population, this is the actual number of people. Again, this is 2019 statistics. There are 116 million people plus people with diabetes in China, 77 million people in India, 30 million, closely 31 million in the US. We have 3 million people, 3.6 million people with diabetes in Malaysia. Okay. And you can also see the number of deaths. India is leading with more than 1 million deaths a year. More than 1 million deaths a year, I believe. Yeah, a year due to diabetes. And whereas we have about 22,000, that's pretty high number. If you think about it, it's 1/4 of Ipoh population, you're going to kill it through diabetes, right? And what is for me was very scary is that even though India has such a high number of deaths and high number of population with diabetes, but it's only 1 in 11 because they are about 1.2 billion people, right? So they have the number in favor. And of course, China has even higher population, is 1.4 or 5 billion people, billion, not million. And there's 1 in 9 people, right? But look at Malaysia, 1 in 6. In this room, out of the 40, right? You have at least 40, how many will be? So 4 people in 10 will, 6 in 10 will have. If we have 40, then we have 32 people with diabetes. And that is diagnosed. How about the undiagnosed? How many people have actually gone there and asked the doctor, could you test my sugar level? So we don't even know how many undiagnosed. Maybe it's not 1 in 6, it's maybe 1 in 4 or 1 in 5. That's every 4th person having diabetes. And I know in my family, majority of them have diabetes. So this is a concern, right? So if this black fungus does become a problem in Malaysia, it will easily overwhelm our system because we have more people with diabetes than any other country in terms of number. Smaller population, more people with diabetes. Okay, so lower your glucose levels, reduce sugar intake, eat healthy, lose weight. That's number 1 thing to lower your diabetic sugar level. Consult your doctor, and I would say mask up and wash your hands. Right? You don't know what you touched, who touched that place before. I still don't go out without my gloves. I have a cotton cloth gloves. I come home and wash it every day. And one of the reasons they're arguing in India for the black fungus is people are reusing the masks and they're not washing the masks daily basis. So if you're using cloth cotton masks, wash it daily. Right? Don't assume, I didn't meet anybody who's sick, so I'm going to be clear of infection, but you're not. So you really want to mask up and change the mask regularly and wash your hands. So in summary, I hope I gave a quick update. I talked about the vaccine approved, and we also talked about the evolution and how it's giving rise to variants. We discussed a little bit on the vaccination in Malaysia, and also gave you a quick tour of all the antivirals, be mindful. And then we talked about the black fungus and diabetes. With that, I am stopping.
Dear Professor Kalai, how can we show our appreciation to you once again? But before we go there, there's so many questions that I'm going to pull out for you to help you go through it. But really, Professor Kalai, you have updated your presentation from the other time and given us so much more up-to-date, not just up-to-date, but so relevant to what we are going through in Malaysia. And for that, I'm sure collectively 80 of us are so grateful, because like you say just now, there's first, there's a lot of information out there. We are not able to filter what's good, what's bad, not because we do not know, really, it's because we don't know enough to filter. So you are helping us filter, and for that we are super grateful. Now let me just go to the top of all the questions, and I'll very quickly go through to see if you have dealt with, just a sec, let me go right to the top. Are we on top? Okay. Let me see. Opinion on mixing vaccines, you have told us very clearly, but I just want to hear, just to be clear, Professor Kalai, you mentioned that if you had Pfizer the first time, or say AstraZeneca, and they are now going to give us Sinovac, for instance, you'll be very happy to take it. Is that what you actually said?
I did, and let me call me Kalai, please.
I thought in front of everyone I should call you Professor Kalai, but of course off session I'm going to call you Kalai once again. But it's okay. I'm going to call you Professor Kalai. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think if that's the only thing available, I would definitely take it. And the Sinovac is the so I have to remind myself, which one is the whole virus? Inactivated whole virus?
That one is Sinovac.
Yeah, so yeah, I would happy to take it. In fact, if I have an opportunity to take a next vaccine, I would take Sinovac.
You will take Sinovac? Okay, good. Because
that's a absolutely personal choice. Yeah.
Sure. No one is going to come back and say, but Professor Kalai said that. All right, everyone in this room, because as she declared upfront, she's not a medical doctor. Of course, what is your feel again? Because only you can explain what is it that you are.
Well, so my field is sort of broad, but I'm a trained medical microbiologist. So I learn about all the bugs and viruses, parasites, fungi, and I teach that to medical students, wannabe medical students as well, and graduate students. My specialization is in a particular bacteria that causes lung infection, called Pseudomonas aeruginosa. We can talk about that another time. And then these days, I'm increasingly focused on the microbiomes, how microbiomes affect our health, our moods. So that's a very interesting topic, very, very current right now. And that's my current area, but I also do a lot of bioinformatics associated with that. So, you got to be constantly on the move, otherwise you will stagnate in research. You can't publish same stuff the same way as we did 20 years ago. So, yeah.
Right.
But over in Malaysia, the government or the particular minister is pushing for, because of supply, I think that the issue is the logistical issue, that they're looking at after the next dose after AstraZeneca would be a Pfizer. Would that also be, I think that's the other question that a lot of people will be anxious to ask. Because I think that's the direction they're looking, because there is going to be a major supply to AstraZeneca.
Yeah, go for it. Like I told you, take the second vaccine, whichever you get. All the others focuses on the same protein. It's the delivery is different, right? One, Pfizer, you deliver it by just injecting the RNA, the info message that get translated in your cells. In the case of the other three, the same protein now is packaged inside a virus as a DNA inside the virus, which goes into the nucleus of the cell and injects just the DNA into the nucleus, where it gets transcribed. And again, the message gets translated outside the nucleus, and then it's the same protein that is targeting. So I don't think there's a problem. Scientifically, there is no problem.
Okay, good to know. Good to know. So friends, even if you had Pfizer or if you had AZ, what we are hearing today is whatever they offer you for the second dose, don't turn it away, unless of course you have allergies or something. But if you are, your profile is quite normal, then what we are hearing is you ought to be just taking it and not refusing it. Yeah. There is a question that says, with so many variants, how, okay, we are taking Pfizer or AZ, how do we protect ourselves with so many variants? Does it mean that we have to keep taking all sorts of vaccinations?
No, so far, most of the, most of the variants of concern seems to be doing okay. The vaccines are doing okay with most of the variants. And I don't, what I think that will happen is over time, we may have to create new vaccines, which is very easy with AstraZeneca and also Pfizer and Moderna. The system they have developed is extremely easy to create new vaccines. Just like how we get, every year they release a different set of flu vaccine. We may have to change that, but right now, don't worry about it. If you learn that the new variants are causing more transmissible, stay home, cover up, mask up against the new variants, but it doesn't stop from that virus mutating in your body. You can't stop it, so there's no way to control.
Okay, that's sensible advice. Why is there a time frame for the second dose?
If you remember in my first talk, when you give the first dose, the immune response is a very a low level of immune response. And the way our immune system works is that there are several different kinds of antibodies, not single antibodies. One of the early antibody, which we call IgM, is the primary immune response. And that primes the cells, but it doesn't give you the memory for our immune system to remember this infection. So when you come with the second dose, this IgM now switch to a different class of antibodies called IgG. Those are the antibodies then will go on to form memory cells that gets put away, right, in our system, so that the second time or the third time you get an infection after we created the memory cells, you don't have the long lag in response. Immediately, the memory cells are called upon to attack the incoming virus. So that's why you need a second dose to create the memory. Where many of these vaccines, except for the inactivated full vaccine, the memory cells are not there, or not there yet. So you need to generate the second, the memory cells to create the right antibodies against the virus. So you have to have second shot. And sometimes, many vaccines, if you miss the second shot in the time frame, you restart the process. You start with a single shot and then the second shot.
Okay, thank you. So, there are some people who are like cancer survivors and all that. People who are high blood pressure, people who are diabetic. What's the advice on the vaccination? Should they just take it anyway?
I mean, if you look at the American Cancer Society or American Diabetic Society websites, do verify. Okay, please do verify. They do have specific instructions whether you should take a vaccine or not. But as far as I could see, vaccine is the best prevention, right? Because if you have cancer, your immune system is quite weak. With vaccine could protect you. You are, so you got to be careful. And if you're on steroids, like I told you got to really check carefully, because the vaccine may not create the necessary immune response.
Yeah, so best to consult the doctors. Yeah.
Sometimes the doctors are not well informed. So go to the right site or right information location. I find many doctors, even in this country, though they don't keep up to date with the current literature, what is current recommendation. You can go to CDC website, Center for Disease Control. You could go to WHO website or Public Health England website. And even Australia has a very good comprehensive website to look at what are they recommending. And those are really, really worth looking up to if you have any questions, because they also have a frequently asked questions section. So you could really get yourself fully well informed.
How about vaccination impact on pregnant women or breastfeeding mothers?
I don't know the answer.
Okay, all right.
I know for sure that we know there is not maternal transfer. Even though, remember, when a baby is born, there are certain antibodies are transferred to the baby to give protection. I don't think there's any evidence to say that SARS-CoV-2 antibodies are transferred. But so I don't know the answer. That's the question I didn't anticipate.
Okay, you know what? And this is the real professional scientists that will tell you if they don't know. Those not so, ones will say, they will just wing it, Anyway, there are a couple of questions, and this is also very real in Malaysia, and I think many, many places. Some of the friends here are feeling very worried about vaccination, because some of them say that not enough science, they understand there's not enough research for the vaccination. It's done very, very quickly. Some have not been FDA approved. How do we know it's really, really, there's no long-term side effects?
Okay, this must be the people who didn't attend the first lecture. Right? Because in the first lecture, we talked about, usually it takes 10 to 15 years for the vaccine to start from the laboratory to roll out. So, and one of the reason is that one person is working on one part of the project, And then only after they do the discovery, they go to the second part, and then they go to third part. And very often it's limited by funding. You may not get funding to go to the second part. You may not get funding to go to the third part. And it costs lots of money, billions of dollars to go A to Z. And what happened in the case of COVID, suddenly people were dying, especially in the Western world, where the money is. So immediately the government mobilized, all the drug companies mobilized, and they poured in billions of dollars into the research. So these 4 different processes can take part simultaneously. Once they had a vaccine candidate, everything occurred simultaneously. They combined phase 1 and phase 2, and then they combined phase 2 and phase 3, and then now phase 4 is what's coming up, right? So once they did all that in a very, quickly, it's not shortchanged. For AstraZeneca, for Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, and Moderna, I can guarantee you it wasn't shortchanged, okay? Because we have the data to prove. For others, we have no idea, okay? I know Sputnik rushed, and the Russians, I know the study wasn't complete. They decided the decision based on 20 individuals. There's no way to make a decision on that, right? Anyway, so now they have more information to support. Having said that, right? So the only thing missing, right? We usually, roll out the phase 4, and we monitor the patients for years, 10 years, 5, 6 years, to see how that individual is reacting to vaccine, what's the side effects. We don't have 10 years. People are dying left and right. Right. So at phase 3, FDA approved it for emergency use. It specifically said it's approved for emergency use. If any other disease, we wouldn't have approved it until it finishes phase 3. And then the phase 4 is continuous. So they approve emergency use, and I think it's an unfounded concern as far as the information for the vaccines we have. And the other vaccines, likely they do fine, but unfortunately, due to the way Russia and China has shared their information, we don't know. So I can answer.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for the very clear explanation about how due processes actually took place, and it's not like there were shortcuts. So there is a group of questions around side effects. Why is it that some of us who were vaccinated, had just went on normal, and some of us were really quite badly affected, like we both went for AZ. He went on business as usual after that. I was wiped out for about a week. So why is it different?
You both are genetically different.
That's an excellent answer.
Each one of us is going to respond to the vaccine differently. And, my husband complained pain and everything. I just went about, there's nothing happened to me. So it's all individual. So it's, each one of us are different from our parents, our brothers, our sisters, and definitely different from our husbands.
Hope so.
Okay, so what is clear is with no side effects, it doesn't mean that it's not working. It's just that, like you say just now, genetically we're different. We respond differently to the vaccinations that is in our system, right? Okay.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, you don't want if you have side effects, the vaccine is working. If you don't have side effects, it doesn't mean it's not working. So
yeah, okay. And just now you were very clear about ivermectin, because you're absolutely right. There's a lot of what do you call that? A lot of messages and WhatsApp messages circulating around
fake news.
Yeah, and how is it that ivermectin is not more promoted? And then there was conspiracy theory against big pharma because ivermectin is so cheap. So there's
Fauci.
Yeah, a lot about that. So happy to hear what you said. In other words, just to repeat what you said, you would never take ivermectin, you said. And Dr. Melanie Yo, so there's a doctor in our presence, she says she totally agrees with you. She totally agrees with you on inactivated vaccine, she says. Yeah, so, but you're very clear on the ivermectin, and I'm so glad you clarify it. And of course, it's your personal view, but certainly I'm going to take your personal view as my standard as well. Thank you.
So there is a study in Australia that showed that ivermectin did help some patients. It's a very small study. And, many of these things are based on this study. And also, that was done also in patients where there was no severe COVID either. And with the amount of neurotoxicity, forget it. I don't want to recover from COVID-19 and go cuckoo rest of my life.
So there's too much downside taking it to recover from COVID, taking it, right?
And it's going to be the exact science as opposed in the amount that you give, when you give, So if you don't get it right, you're basically using a shotgun to kill the mosquito.
Right. If you need 10 times more in the lab to see it on a Petri dish, and then in human, you may need 100 times more to see an effect. You might as well commit suicide, right?
Oh gosh, that's very, very, very clear way of telling us not to take ivermectin. Thank you. Someone then asked, of course, we know you have not acquired a taste for tempeh, but so is it best to avoid tempeh then?
No. I would say it seems like for some reason in Malaysia, even though we use the same fungi for tempeh, we don't have a mucormycosis problem. So I would say if we are using tempeh, preserve it properly, make sure if it turns black or whatever, don't take it as a delicacy and eat it. As long as the fungi remains white, that's only hyphae. You don't have any spores and you're fine.
Okay.
And tempeh has a lot of other good things too, which I can't divulge here because, but tempeh is a good alternate for meat lovers, right? It's sold as a superfood for vegans and vegetarians. Yes. So yeah, I don't think, but I would be mindful and make sure don't preserve your starter culture well, and when you do tempehs, make sure you don't keep it too long until you start seeing. Sometimes what you can't see, what kills you, because they're so small, you can't see until it's too late, right? So you got to be mindful. So throw away things with fungal spores and wrap it in a plastic and throw it away so that it protects other people.
Yeah. So you know what? That's a very balanced view of explaining about tempeh, because otherwise the first thing we do is, okay, we'll never touch tempeh anymore, One more question, and I think it's a really good question. Now, if someone have been infected by COVID already, do they still need vaccination?
Well, technically your body has the antibodies. What the CDC do recommend is wait for 90 days and take a vaccine just to make sure that you're vaccinated. But yeah, you do have a protection from the first. If you're infected, you do have the protection. But certainly CDC does recommend that you should wait and then take the vaccine.
Okay. Yeah, so that's also, I think, the general guidance in Malaysia. While, once you have that, it doesn't mean that you don't need vaccination, but you can take it at 90 days interval.
Yeah.
I'm quoting Dr.
Or the number of days can vary, you do check it, okay?
Okay. Dr. Melanie Yeoh said that she's not an ivermectin advocate, but she has also read how it's also helping in some places, but it has to be not as super high doses, etc., etc. Anyway, anyone and everyone who's listening to this, please, if you choose to take ivermectin, do it at, with what do you call that? With consultation with the right people, right specialists.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we have an issue in many countries where you can get drugs, over-the-counter drugs without prescription. Right. In the US, you cannot get ivermectin without prescription. So, it's not easily accessible. And this whole ivermectin is really, I have to say that Southeast Asian countries who are like pushing, or there are one or two people pushing for it.
Yeah.
It's really wrong.
And you know what? I know of people who have just bought it over Shopee and are taking it. It's a bit scary too. Because how do we know even the source of that ivermectin is done properly? It could be a fake ivermectin for that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't buy any drugs over the a post, right? Because what is delivered to you may not be what you asked for.
Yeah. Friends, I'm going to not ask any more questions, but there is a question here that Professor Kalai have asked us to answer, and I'm sure all of you will answer in the chat box. She asked, what was the highlight of the session for you? What could be improved? Any other comments? Could you kindly share your thoughts in there? Yeah. Share your thoughts in the chat box, because this session is being recorded so that Professor Kalai can then have a transcript and she can see what you say. All right. So
if there are any misinformation, I will try to answer them.
Yeah. So this is back to you, Prof. I think you want to say something about this.
Yeah. So while you guys, all of you are writing your comments, I want to have one more slide to share, and this is practice fact check. Right? We talked about how there is so much information, or misinformation. For example, somebody asked me, so there's a whole story that Singapore is not listening to WHO, and I went and just asked the question, is Singapore not listening to WHO a fake story? That's a simple question, right? I had several credible links to say that Singapore is trying to debunk this story. This is wrong. And whoever is propagating this story is, the story also said that Singapore did the first biopsy and showed that these COVID patients didn't have any virus. Where did that come from? I don't know, right? So there are several ways to check. First, you consider where it is coming from, right? And you check who's the author. I checked the date. I had recently a 5-year-old fake news circulating. And when I checked it, it's all fake news even 5 years ago. And if it was a fake news 5 years ago, it's a fake news now. So check when it was started. And sometimes you are biased. You want to believe in this fake news because your thoughts are biased towards it. So you got to also consider how it affects your judgment. But read beyond just this reading these 2-minute, 30-second blurbs that comes through your WhatsApp. Go look up, how outrageous this claim is. So is it really? And ask the question, what is the real story? What is the whole story behind this news? And these days you can make up videos of old people dancing. Is it really true? Right? Recently, a chancellor, a vice chancellor of university, there were fake videos made of them, and that was not true. And there was a very interesting TV show where these guys, because they didn't like him, they created a fake video with this guy, with another woman, and completely destroyed his career, his family. This is what fake news can and will do if we don't verify. And what are the sources? Click on those links to see where is it coming from. Who is telling you this story? There are a lot of people who are right-wing and very conservative, and they don't believe in evolution, and they will tell you these things are this whole COVID is a hoax. COVID is not a hoax when you have somebody in your family dies. So check where sources are, who is talking about it. And sometimes it's so outlandish, it's maybe a joke, but you took it seriously. And and research who is the author. If they put my name, find out if it's I am a real person. Sometimes this real person doesn't exist. And then certainly ask the experts. identify who are, what are the, know where to go for medical news, credible websites, like I told you, NIH is one place I go to, CDC, National Institute of Health in US, Center of Disease Control, Public Health England, the European Union Health networks, WHO. These are the links I will go because I know those information are verified, and they're always very cautious in telling you what to do and what not to do. They're not going to blanketly say, oh, use ivermectin. They will say, this is what we know about ivermectin. This is not recommended. What do we recommend? They will tell you, right? So verify. And there is also a couple of websites, is Fact Check Explorer, right? And you can even test check even if your Google, YouTube videos are real. So there's also a place to fact check your YouTubes. So before forwarding, hit the pause button. Don't simply forward because it's important news. It's a funny you want to share with people is fine, but so be mindful when you do when you forward things. Do a fact check. And I will practice, and I recommend all of you practice, teach it to your children, teach it to your friends. Anytime you hear something outrageous, you fact check it and say, hey, by the way, this is wrong. And I read something outlandish, I know it's wrong. And sometimes I don't have time to immediately respond to tell you it's a wrong thing. All right. Okay, with that, I'm going to stop.